Good evening. I'm Ryan Doyle filling in for Michael Koren tonight. In less than a week, on August 28th, the world will commemorate one of the greatest oratories ever delivered. It was on the day back in 1963 that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream.
Yeah.
It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
There will be marches, speeches, including a speech by President Obama on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and a ceremony of global bell ringing. What there won't be is an honest and frank discussion about the current climate of race relations in the United States and Canada to a lesser extent.
Lee, do you think that America is a more or less racist country since Barack Obama became president?
Wow, that's a powerful question. I think that people are angry that he's president, and I think that they're showing their true colors. And I think that you know, when Danny Strong wrote those words, any black man could be killed by any white man and get away with it. Trayvon Martin had not happened. I come out of my edit room, and Trayvon Martin has happened.
Part of that non-existent discussion should be rooted in the way the Trayvon Martin case was perceived. Martin was a 17-year-old African-American high school student that was shot and killed during a skirmish with George Zimmerman, a white, Hispanic neighborhood watch captain in Sanford, Florida. What should have been viewed as a simple, albeit tragic, altercation between two men became much, much more. Instead, what followed was a racially charged us versus them sideshow that did more to hurt the work done by the late Dr. King than it ever did to help. President Obama made the unprecedented move of discussing the case, weighing in on a story that shouldn't have made it past the front pages of the local newspaper. The reason was race. Obama poured more fuel on the racially charged fire when he said these words.
And when I think about this boy, I think about my own kids. You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
That statement playing into the agenda of those that wanted to look past Mr. Zimmerman's mixed race and make the issue black against white. The likes of Jesse Jackson, who called Florida nothing more than an apartheid state, or Al Sharpton, who constantly called the Trayvon Martin shooting a crime against us, further drawing an unnecessary line in the sand. For these men, there are no shades of gray. They have a need to keep that divide strong, even if it is nowhere as deep as they make it out to be. Which brings me to the question many have asked in theory during the year-and-a-half-long ordeal involving Trayvon Martin. What if the race was reversed? What if the victim was white and the shooter was black? A hypothetical question that many failed to answer. Would there be protests? Would there be comments from the president? Turns out we didn't have to wait long for a very real answer to that hypothetical question.
To start to Plato in Twilight Beach, we have a male that says he has been shot. He's bleeding in the back.
He's not conscious. Is he still breathing? Barely. I hear no sirens. I see no lights. Oh my gosh, how long is it going to be?
Ma'am, all I know is they're coming. I can't make them go any faster, okay? I've got them on the way.
Has he stopped breathing? Yes. Yes, they said he has. Finally, here's some police.
This past week, we learned the horrific details of 3 Oklahoma teenagers that allegedly followed and then shot an Australian baseball player for the fun of it.
He was asked why they did it, and he basically said we were bored. We didn't have anything to do, and we decided to kill somebody.
The Australian, Chris Lane, was in Oklahoma on a baseball scholarship. He decided to go out for a jog. The 3 men sat and waited in a car looking to kill. When Lane jogged by right past them, they picked him as a target. 16-year-old Chancey Allen Luna is alleged to have pulled the trigger on a .22 caliber revolver and shot Lane in the back of the head, leaving him to die. They claim they did it because they were bored. Now, here you have the exact scenario that was debated in the Trayvon Martin case. A couple of black men killing a white man. Yet the same mass hysteria is nowhere to be found. Jesse Jackson, well, he says he frowns upon the killings, which to me doesn't seem like he gives a damn because, well, it doesn't further his agenda. And the White House, this time around, they're going to wait for all the facts, a luxury they weren't so quick to hand George Zimmerman. It's not that I feel that this case should necessarily be chalked up to race either, but I ask that there be some consistency. The constant fervor that is whipped up needs to end. We have to engage in more thoughtful reflection and understand that just because a crime involves two different types of skin doesn't always mean that race is going to be the reason that that crime was committed. In that very same speech Dr. King delivered in Washington nearly 50 years ago today, he said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Perhaps it's finally time we made character the issue and allowed color to be a thing of the past.
He was asked why they did it, and he basically said we were bored. We didn't have anything to do, and we decided to kill somebody.
There you have the motive for what is a stunning and shocking killing that happened in Oklahoma. As we just mentioned, a jogger, an Australian who was there on a scholarship for baseball, gunned down because the young men involved had nothing better to do. There are so many questions in this story. We're going to talk to Ben Shapiro about this. Ben, let's talk a little bit about the idea of this being a thrill kill, because to me, I see some distinct comparisons between this and the killing of Trayvon Martin, but the reactions seem to be different.
The reaction is very different. In this case, not only is it a thrill kill, new reports are suggesting that actually it may have been part of a gang initiation. They decided to kill this guy on the way to performing a gang initiation. The media has reacted as though there's no racial component to this killing at all, despite the fact that at least one of the teens who was involved had tweeted racial epithets multiple times, racially charged tweets multiple times, and presumably all 3 of the members who were in the car were looking to join a gang, even though one of them was white. The media has basically ignored this case. The White House said that they didn't know anything about this case. Obviously, the same was not true of Trayvon Martin, in which the media injected a racial angle that simply didn't exist and then turned it into a national story for a year and a half.
Let's talk a little bit about those tweets, because to me, when an individual, a black individual, tweets out the fact he hates 90% of white people, as the gunman is alleged to have tweeted out in this case, and he talks about how he's knocked out 5 woods, which I understand is a derogatory term for white people, and he makes reference to the George Zimmerman verdict. Race does play an issue somewhat here. I just want a level playing field. If you're going to get upset about Trayvon Martin and you're going to make that a race issue, certainly you have to make it a race issue when it goes the other way.
Well, the problem is that the left is not really interested in the race issue that really is more problematic when it comes to crime. On a percentage basis, blacks are responsible for more white murders than whites are responsible for blacks' murders, and it's not really close. I mean, the 4 times the number of white people are killed by black people as black people killed by white people. But the left likes to make it into America's a racist country. The truth is that the racial issues that have to do with hatred of whites in the black community are deeply troubling. They remain deeply troubling, and the criminal violence problem within the black community is deeply troubling as well. A huge number of the murders in the United States, an extraordinarily disproportionate number of murders in the United States, are committed by folks who are black. That doesn't have to do with race. It has to do with culture. It has to do with a variety of factors, including poverty. But bottom line is that if we are going to talk about race as though it is a relevant issue to crime, it would be fully dishonest to not look at reverse racism when you're looking at racial crimes.
Let's bring Barack Obama. You talk about the left-wing media not wanting to touch this story and injecting themselves into the case of Trayvon Martin hand over fist. They really went into that one, as did the White House. Barack Obama was very vocal. He talked about how Trayvon Martin could have been his son. I notice he's not making the same announcement today saying one of these people with a gun in their hand that gunned down an innocent man that was simply out for a jog also could have been one of his sons.
And you know what? That really is a problem, because the truth is that there are a lot more young black men who are involved in a culture like the 2 young black men who are involved in this particular shooting than young black men who are killed by people in self-defense, Hispanic men in self-defense. I mean, the bigger problem for young black men is being shot by young black men, especially in gang warfare. President Obama has not really said anything about that. If he's going to inject himself into racial situations, what he really should be doing, if he really wants to speak truth to power, he should be talking to young black men about the problem of criminal violence. He should be talking to young black men about the problem of getting involved in gangs. He should be talking to the entire nation about the problem of young black men doing that because, I mean, honestly, it's not good for the black community, and it shouldn't be restricted to young black men. President Obama should be talking to people of all races about criminal violence.
No, I remember saying this at the time, but when Barack Obama decided to inject himself in what should have been a local story down in Sanford, Florida with Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, when he injected himself into that, he really opened the door up to having to comment on every story. Otherwise, he runs the risk of being inconsistent.
Oh, that's 100% true. And you notice that he sort of has a checklist as to stories that are local that he comments on. He'll comment on Henry Louis Gates, a black professor from Harvard who's arrested, and he'll say that the Cambridge police acted stupidly. He'll comment on Trayvon Martin, but when it comes to Dr. Gosnell up in Philadelphia, the black abortionist who was convicted of killing a woman, then he won't comment on that. That's a local story. When it comes to Mayor Filner down in San Diego, a Democrat who's sexually harassed, apparently, at least 18 women, then he won't comment on that. That's a local story. When it comes to this particular killing of Christopher Lane, he won't comment on that. That's a local story. That inconsistency has a theme to it, and I think that's why a lot of folks are upset.
Yeah, and the interesting part to this, too, I mean, this is not just even a local story. This has international ramifications. I mean, you've got an entire continent in Australia that is outraged about this story because one of their citizens was gunned down while doing nothing but going out for a jog.
Well, what's truly fascinating about this is that you would imagine that the White House would jump on this story because whenever there is an act of gun violence, the White House likes to talk about how there's a need for gun control. And especially in a state like Oklahoma, which is not a heavily gun-controlled state, you would imagine that the White House would be out front and central, especially given the fact that so many people in Australia, including the former foreign minister, have called for a boycott on travel to the United States because of the U.S.'s gun laws. You would think that Obama would be really pushing this pretty hard, but he's staying away from it, and it's probably because of the racial angle.
Does it matter at all, and I'll play devil's advocate here for a second, does it matter at all that one of these individuals is white or perhaps mixed race?
I don't see why that really should matter. I mean, I think that it's relevant to the question as to whether racism was involved, but the fact is if all three of them were about to be involved in a gang initiation into the Crips, this is actually kind of an odd subculture in the United States of young white guys who get very involved in gang culture, whether it's white or black. Gang culture is not limited to black folks, of course. And so I think that it has to do, again, more with gang culture, which is in many cases racist, rather than it has to do with race purely.
Yeah, and I think it's something that the president equally should be speaking out against. If we've got a problem or an epidemic of white and black people mixing together, getting involved in gangs, and thinking that it's okay to sit there and just out of sheer boredom or a jump into a gang as some sort of initiation that they're going to kill somebody, he's got to step out and say, this is not right, this is something we don't want to see replicated. And if he's got to say it loud enough that the people in Australia hear it, well, then so be it. But the president, he can't just sit and stay quiet on this issue. Ben, we appreciate it as always.
Thanks so much.